On today's show, the James Harden back to Houston rumors are ramping up like crazy after the Sixers' Game 7 loss against the Celtics. Would you want to see James Harden back in Rockets red? We're going to go over the pros and cons to a James Harden return, as well as the NBA draft lottery is finally here.
Pray for Victor.
Oh, the impact, the implications, all the possible outcomes, plus we lock in our official predictions. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. What I want, your thoughts. Do you want James Harden back in Houston, as well as give me your official prediction before we head into the NBA draft lottery? Now, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, none other than the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose, who you can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. And Ben, it is finally upon us, NBA Draft Lottery Day 2023. We're going to spend a little bit of time giving our predictions, our final thoughts before this fateful day that's going to change the entirety of the NBA landscape ultimately takes place. But first, we got to talk about the elephant, the bearded elephant in the room, if you will, James Harden. With the way that the Philadelphia 76ers season came to an end, it almost feels like the NBA script is being beautifully written for a James Harden return to Houston, at least at this point, with all the factors at play.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a bit of a victory lap because I became a bit of a punching bag on Twitter the last couple of weeks for being one of the few diehard Rockets people that was not cheering for Philadelphia to win that series. And that's because even though the end was ugly, I do think this leads to the cleanest fit for James Harden with the Rockets long term. Because I know there's this romanticized scenario of, or was, what if the Sixers win it all, he gets his ring, and then he can ride off into the sunset in Houston without the pressure of needing to win a title for his legacy. The reality, first off, I was always skeptical that he would want to leave a team at that level after trying to get there his entire career. The bonds you form on that kind of journey in the NBA playoffs, they're extraordinary. And secondly, even if he was willing to pull a Kawhi Leonard, which is clearly the exception to the rule, and leave in that type of scenario, typically that's also the set of circumstances that can lead to a guy getting overpaid because he's got the halo around him as a guy who potentially just took his team to the NBA title. And so maybe he goes to Houston in that scenario, but you do have to give him a 4-year max, something like that. For their run to end the way it did yesterday, as painful as it was for the Sixers and for James, that might be the perfect storm scenario for him to, first off, want to leave, because I do think there's an idea now that that iteration of the Sixers has peaked. This is their ceiling.
He's already being made out to be the villain, which at the end of the day, look,
and
James
Boston's
Harden
going
was
nowhere.
James Harden was not brought there to be the man, though. He was not brought there to be Houston James Harden. He was brought there to be the Robin to Embiid's Batman, and I feel like Embiid has not gotten his fair share of the blame for how disappointing that Game 7 was.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just on James. I think that was a referendum on the entire Sixers organization. And quite frankly, even though I respect Daryl Morey, I'm not sure where he goes from here, because it's not like they have much in the way of future assets, be it draft, young players they can trade to get another star in there. And of course, with the new CBA, it's going to be tougher to stack stars anyway, even if you did have people that were willing and able to come it feels like that iteration of the Sixers has run its course. And Boston, with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown being as young as they are, they're not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. So how do they get over that hump? It's a perfect storm scenario for Harden to potentially look elsewhere. We know the ties that Houston has to him. I know you can consider Game 7 a flame out. I think that's a little unfair to judge him entirely by that, because the Sixers would never have been in that Game 7 if not for him being out of this world good in Game 1 or Game 4. But the reality is people are going to remember Game 7 and how poorly it went for not just Harden, but Embiid as well. And perhaps with James turning 34 years old this summer, maybe this is the scenario where the Rockets can get him on a friendly deal, as opposed to, if he's coming off a championship, having to pay a 4-year max. Maybe this is the scenario where you can get him for 1 or 2 years. Because the reality, look, the Rockets are not going to contend for a championship next year or the year after that, barring divine intervention. It's just not going to happen. So if he no-shows in an elimination game, that doesn't really matter here. That doesn't affect my calculus one bit. In terms of James Harden and the Rockets, it's going to be about the regular season and how he helps young guys like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. develop. Obviously, he led the NBA in assists this season. He's a really good point guard. He's a really good playmaker. It's just about the salary. I think committing a 4-year max is too much for a guy who would be age 37 at the end of that deal. But if you could get him for maybe 2+1, to where just the first 2 years are guaranteed and you're not going to have any championship expectations in those seasons anyway, then yeah, he could be the perfect bridge to that next generation. And perhaps this season ending the way it did, not only does it make him more likely to look elsewhere, but maybe it also puts a little bit of doubt amongst contenders to where, hey, nobody's willing to give him that 4-year max that I'm sure on a business level he wants. So maybe it's more realistic for the Rockets to not just get him, period, but get him on the type of terms that they want in terms of money and years.
For me, so much of it, Ben, is about expectations upon a potential James Harden return, right? What would the expectations outline be, right? And I think that's where there's a bit of a disconnect amongst some Rockets fans. Is there's some fans who are like, I think, super gung-ho on the idea of bringing James Harden back, period, regard, like nothing. Like they're just like, bring him back, bring him home. And I think some of those fans are maybe caught up in the nostalgia factor of the old James Harden, right? And he's not that guy anymore. It's as evidenced by the playoffs, right? It's sometimes a bit more feast or famine with Harden these days. I do agree with your point completely, though, right? It's about him coming back. It's about elevating the floor. It's about bringing this team, back into some semblance of relevancy, right? The flaming out in elimination games or struggling in the brightest moments in the playoffs isn't really a factor if you're not in the playoffs to begin with, right? Yeah. So you have to get back there for that to even be a relevant concern, and the Rockets have to take those steps to actually get back to that place. So for me, it starts with the expectation factor, right? What are the expectations if James Harden does come back to Houston? And then 2, how do you actually make it work, right? What are the logistics of bringing Harden back to Houston? You touched on the idea of him coming back on a bit more of a sweetheart deal. I'm now more open to the idea. I've been saying for a while now, I'm only willing to, bring James Harden back if they land Wembanyama in the draft lottery, right? If you get pick number 1, cool, bring James Harden back. You have a lot of fun with it. Things suddenly change. The calculus changes a lot for me if you are able to get James Harden on a discounted deal, a 2+1, like you said, or just a lower average annual value, because then that to me doesn't actually, pigeonhole you for the foreseeable future as the young guys start to kind of come into their own as NBA players. I want to take a look at some of the pros and cons to bringing James Harden back, some of the ways that the Rockets could bring him back, aside from just outright signing him this offseason, maybe getting a little bit creative with a sign and trade from the 76ers. We're going to get there in just one moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Look, buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful, right? You're trying to go out and have a good time, whether it's to a concert or a play or a sporting event. You don't need to be stressed about how you're going to get your tickets. GameTime can help you. They've got flash deals on last-minute tickets, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area, images of the seat view so you know exactly the type of bang you're getting for the buck that you're spending. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email or anything like that. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your very first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Be sure to tune in to our very next episode as we'll be reacting to the results of the NBA draft lottery, for better or for worse. So, as we are now within the 24-hour window of the NBA draft lottery, make sure that you
Pray for Victor.
Pray for Victor at all costs. Oh man, it's gonna be so nerve-wracking, Ben. I'm not ready for it.
Yeah, I know, me neither.
We're gonna talk a little bit about the lottery here in the final segment. We'll make our official predictions here in the third segment. We're gonna keep things focused on James Harden here for a minute, because Ben, I think there are some really interesting permutations now for how the Rockets could go about acquiring James Harden. That could be, obviously, the simplest one is just, all right, just go out and sign him, right? You got $60 million in cap space. I do worry about that route, though, because even if you get James Harden on a discounted deal, right? Let's say, rather than a full-blown max, somewhere in the, 4-year, $200 million range, starting out at $50 million a year, that would eat such a significant chunk of your cap space. But even if you could get him on 35, 40, 45, a slight discount here or there, that still doesn't leave you a ton of room to work with the remaining cap space available. And one of the biggest things that we've heard, Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office talk about going into this offseason is the idea of adding multiple veterans to this roster, a roster that does have some significant holes across the board, right? We can look at it. They need a guard. Ideally, they need a point guard. That would be your James Harden, right? He kind of addresses a pretty big need. But then you maybe need a veteran wing, probably a different type of big to put, to give you a different look than Alperen Sengun. And it becomes a lot harder to accomplish that if you give $40 to $45 million to James Harden. The more that I think about it, the more that a sign and trade for James Harden makes so much sense, because James could very easily go to Daryl and basically say, hey, look, I'm going to leave, and, I'm going to leave for nothing, or, and I could just outright sign in Houston. Or what I could do is you could sign and trade me to Houston. I could opt out. You sign me to a new deal, and then you maybe recoup some value, some assets from the Rockets, either by way of just a one-for-one trade or maybe roping in a third team to get really creative with things.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been pushing on Twitter is for people to think about how the entire puzzle fits in all of this when it comes to acquiring James Harden. One of the arguments against I've seen is this idea that, well, you could just sign a couple of mid-tier players. Well, first off, I think people are forgetting that the Rockets have won 22 games or less in each of the last 3 seasons. Part of the reason that Harden has so much appeal is that, unlike most players who would probably ask for more to sign in Houston because they typically want to play for a contender, Harden has these ties to the city and the franchise that most don't, so he's more willing to give you a discount. Some of these mid-tier guys that people are intrigued by might not be so mid-tier to sign in Houston. They may be mid-tier to sign somewhere else. That's part of the appeal to Harden. But the other thing that you have to consider, if hypothetically you don't sign Harden, but you signed a couple of mid-tier guys, and this goes into your point about the sign and trade, it's not just about the players you bring in, it's how they fit in within the construct of your roster. Because, for example, you already have a fairly deep rotation, the way it's set up already. The 5 guys that were your starters to end the season, none of them older than 22 years old. They're not going anywhere. They're all under contract. You also have Tari Eason off the bench. You're going to have your 2023 high lottery pick in the top 6. You're going to have Jae'Sean Tate. And that's 8 guys already before we even go into the fringe guys. For this exercise, I'm not counting guys like Usman Garuba, Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, your second first-round pick this year, and so on and so forth. So even if you just add one player like James Harden, all of a sudden that's a full rotation already with 9 guys that are qualified and either expecting to play or needing to play in the case of your guy, hopefully Victor Wembanyama, that you draft in 2023.
Pray for Victor.
You're already pretty full. So if you bring in more guys, if your idea is quantity over quality, more of these mid-tiers, then okay, at some point you're going to be having to discard guys that are already expecting minutes right now. Because someone like Jae'Sean Tate or KJ Martin is not going to just sit at the end of your bench and not play. That's not realistic. So you would have to consider what you're doing with them as well. And so it's not as simple as saying, well, you can sign 2 guys instead of Harden. No, you'd be giving up Harden and somebody else. And so that's where the sign and trade could come into play as well. Because if you're wanting to add more guys, you're also going to have to most likely subtract at some point. You're not going to realistically either have a happy guy just not playing at the end of your bench like Jae'Sean Tate or KJ Martin. And it's also a situation where their value would just depreciate to where you almost have to give them away. So I think it could sort of be the best of both worlds. If you look at some trade options, then it could sort of clear out your logjam. I think especially at the forward spots where Jabari and Tari are what they are. Then you have KJ and Jae'Sean Tate. We hope they're adding a certain forward tomorrow, but honestly, even if it's not Victor Wembanyama, there's still Brandon Miller, there's Cam Whitmore, there's lots of guys at those spots. There's a bit of a logjam, and so you could potentially clear it, be it for James Harden or someone else.
You're so sold on Harden already, Ben. You just blew straight past the stop sign that was Scoot Henderson. You were like, nope, no Scoot Henderson here.
Well, no.
I'm just saying only wings.
No, I'm just saying Scoot's a minority. Like, that's a 13% chance. But most of the people are wing/forwards that are going to be in play for the Rockets on
I respect the James Harden manifestation. That's what's happening here.
And to your point on a Harden sign and trade, the Sixers would be heavily incentivized to cooperate because they have no ability to replace him otherwise. So if you're looking to Daryl Morey and saying, hey, you're likely to lose James no matter what, even if it's not super appetizing, it's not like the Rockets are a rival of the Sixers. They play in a different conference. I'm sure he'd rather be at someone like Jae'Sean Tate. Maybe it's Kevin Porter Jr. If you're not sold on what his long-term fit is in this configuration, that's better for the Sixers than literally watching Harden walk into cap space and them having no ability to potentially replace him.
And it's important. Yeah, it's really important to note on that front too, is even if the Sixers aren't necessarily interested in whatever the poo-poo platter offer is from the Rockets, it at least gives them some flexibility to then have those pieces to then make subsequent moves. So maybe they're not even super interested in KPJ as a player or Jae'Sean Tate as the player or KJ Martin, whatever. Maybe having those pieces lets them flip those assets into something else. Even if it's 50 cents on the dollar on a trade for James Harden, a sign and trade deal, at least that gives them a little bit of flexibility moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. My general advice would just be for people to think about the entire puzzle, because the bottom line is, in this free agency for the Rockets, there's not going to be one guy that you say, hey, I'm going to give a blank check to. All of this is conditional. I would not give a 4-year max to James Harden every year being guaranteed. I think that's an overstep. And honestly, I don't see a player on the market that I would give that to. I certainly wouldn't to Kyrie Irving with all of his baggage and also where the Rockets are as a franchise. It's not like any player is going to lift them to contention the next couple of years anyway. That type of player, in terms of Nikola Jokic, Giannis, someone like that, is not on the market. So be it James Harden or we go tiers below and talk Pat Beverly types, it's all conditional. There are limits. When I say I'm a Harden guy, I generally am, but I would not give him a 4-year max, just as people who want more mid-tier guys like Pat Beverly. I give you the benefit of the doubt. I assume you don't want to give $40 billion a year to Pat Beverly. No, it's all conditional. So when we talk about these scenarios, it's not as if someone that's pro Harden is saying, give me James Harden no matter what. Give him the keys to your franchise. No, we're talking about on the assumption.
No, it's like the Kellerman video. Instead of Iguodala, it's I want James Harden.
It's assuming that based on this interest that's been reported since Christmas, that you can potentially get some things that work out pretty well, both financially and otherwise. Well, certainly financially, but also in terms of the number of guaranteed years that perhaps give you a friendly deal. Because ultimately, for the Rockets where they are, it's all about value. It's all about using this free agency period as a bridge. And I think that's the way people need to look at it. You're not trying to finish the puzzle here. The odds are the guys you get in this free agency period, what you're trying to do is just raise your floor, as you said, for the next couple of years, help you get back to relevancy. And then 2-3 years from now, maybe Jalen, Jabari, and Wemby, knock on wood, are the guys that just develop into, the KD, Russ, and ironically James Harden Thunder from more than a decade ago. Or perhaps it's just them getting a little bit better, and then you make a big free agency or trade acquisition down the line, perhaps using James Harden's expiring contract. This is just a bridge. This is a step. And we need to just think about it as, parts to the puzzle. And another part of that puzzle, as you said, is when we talk about acquiring, it doesn't have to be a signing. It can be a trade, because if the Rockets are bringing in 2 or 3 guys this offseason, and especially I've seen some suggesting, you can bring in 3 or 4 if you don't sign a Harden. Okay, then what's going to happen with the 8 players you already have on your current roster, not even counting the late first round guys that need rotation minutes, that are expecting rotation minutes next season? It's not as if you're just going to sit them at the end of your bench and just let their value decline to nothing. No, you need to offload them. You need to consider that. And maybe that makes more sense to do a trade and consider that as part of, the cost for acquiring them. It's about the entire puzzle. And for me, James Harden is one of the cleanest puzzle fits in terms of just dropping in at a clear position of need. This team certainly needs a point guard. It needs more playmaking. It's not easy to add much in terms of quantity for the reasons that we were just outlining. It's not as if this team has a ton of clearly vacant rotation spots. That's one of them. He happens to be one of the best names on the market. And oh, by the way, unlike most guys who there would probably be a Rockets tax, Houston has to pay more to get them to consider joining a rebuilding team. James Harden might actually give the Rockets a Houston discount. And so you put all of that together, and that's why I think there's a clear case for him to be on Houston's wish list and near the top of it.
James Harden is currently the hot topic amongst Rockets fans for sure. And this is going to be such a discussion for the next month and a half, 2 months until we actually get to free agency. But the very first domino that has to fall is where the Rockets land in the NBA draft lottery. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. We're going to hash out the best case and worst case scenario for the Rockets in the lottery, as well as making our official predictions coming up in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Nikola Jokic to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Jimmy Butler to have less than 6.5 assists? Or what about Jason Tatum to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available, and Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. And right now, every day of the NBA playoffs and through the finals, one Prize Picks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. But you have to download the Prize Picks app to find out how. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. And it's time to talk a little bit about the lottery bin. Now, there's been so much buildup to this moment for this Houston Rockets team. We've been looking forward and ahead at the lottery. I think the first time I took a glance at the lottery this year, I think the very first Tankathon on Spin I did was like back in November. Yeah. I usually try to have a rule where I try not to get to it until like the calendar year of like the lottery, and I caved like all the way back in November with like the terrible start to the season and everything. We needed some optimism. We needed to be able to look forward, light at the end of the tunnel, that kind of stuff. We know that best case scenario for this lottery Tuesday evening is the number 1 overall pick, right? This lottery and the type of prospect that Victor Wembanyama has a chance to change the future of the NBA landscape forever for whatever team he ultimately lands on. And even past Wemby, there's talents like Scoot Henderson, like Brandon Miller, like the Thompson twins, like Jarris Walker. So even if it's obviously best case scenario would be incredible for this Rockets team, but all the talent at the top of this NBA draft, there's a lot of different pieces that could fit into, as you alluded to, right, the puzzle that is currently this Rockets rebuild. I don't want to say I've like subscribed to the note. Like I'm going into it. I'm trying not to go into it setting myself up for disappointment, right? I feel like stress-wise, I think this one is going to be even more stressful than the Jalen Green draft, because even though in that one you had a chance to lose the pick, this one I feel like there's so much more riding on the line because of the talent that is Wemby and Scoot Henderson, at least at the top of the draft.
Yes, but I will say that while the upside is theoretically even more, I don't think the downside is anywhere near as significant as dropping to 18. And I also have such a hard time getting excited about the upside because it's only 27%. That's your odds at getting Victor or Scoot. As opposed to Jalen Green, it was truly 50-50, which for me at least was the most maddening because it was literally a coin flip in that, there's reason to be cautious. And yet there's also reason to think you have a realistic shot. It's literally the flip of a coin, or 52-48, pretty close to that. Whereas with here, I'm keeping a much more level-headed, like, it's not being pessimistic to be pessimistic. It's just realistic. The 73% outcome is that you're going to be at pick 3 or lower. That's just what the odds say. And so for me, that's a bit different than 2 years ago, at least in terms of my expectations. I'm also personally trying to keep in the back of my mind that the Rockets have been pretty lucky the last 2 years. Even if they fall to number 6 this year, which, knock on wood, I hope they don't. I think the last 2 years, I crunched the numbers, it's 11% to have a top 2 1 year and a top 3 the next, or vice versa. When you look at actually even being the worst team, which the Rockets were, and having that activate, because you have to win a lottery pick in both years with your 4-digit combination coming out. They've already been pretty fortunate and gotten 2 guys that, we hope can be cornerstones. Maybe they're not Wemby, but they're pretty talented young players in Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. So while tomorrow would be sort of the icing on the cake, if you will, if you can get Victor or Scoot, I'm not counting on it. And while I'm hopeful it's going to be like an NBA changing day because somebody's going to get the best prospect since LeBron, and that's a big deal, at the end of the day, it's not quite as nerve-wracking when it's, for me at least, compared to when it was literally a flip of a coin.
Well, and when we go back and look at the other numbers too, somebody crunched the numbers on Twitter. So I'm trusting a random Twitter user here, which is never a good idea, but here we go. Here's apparently where the second worst team has landed in the past 10 NBA drafts. So Rockets are the second best odds in the lottery. First place happened 3 times, so 30% of the time. That's not bad. Second place happened once. Third place happened once. Fourth place happened 4 times. Fifth place happened 1 time. And then sixth place happened 0 times. So of the last 10 years of the NBA draft, second in the standings, wound up picking, decent odds for that number 1 overall pick. And then again, I know it doesn't, we're at this point, it's all superstition and, reading tea leaves and black magic here and there, trying to, break out the prayer candle, all that good stuff, trying to make it happen. Whatever superstitious things you have going on, that's what you got to break out for this draft lottery.
I will say another reason why my expectations are a bit more muted. It's actually been a lot more stable at the top of the lottery the last few years than you would think with the NBA's new weighting scheme, which they introduced, of course, in 2019 to try and disincentivize tanking. Look, the reality is that teams from the middle to even bottom of the odds going into the lottery, their odds are really not all that different at getting one of those lottery picks than a team like the Rockets or the Pistons or the Spurs that have maximum odds. That's the whole point of the system the NBA put into place. And so even with all of that, the last few years, it's been relatively flat. Teams like the Rockets and Pistons that have been bad have consistently been near the top of the draft order. Well, I guess the Pistons did fall to 5 a year ago. Look, I think we're due for something unconventional. I think we're due for someone jumping up. Now, maybe they just jump up to 3 or 4 and they don't jump the Rockets, but I'm bracing myself for someone off the beaten path, like in Orlando and Indiana, someone like that.
Put on the tinfoil hat and Dallas jumps up to number 1 so that they can pair Wemby and Luka together.
Although the NBA should rig it to prevent it from going to Dallas after the stunt they pulled at the end of the season.
Oh man. That's my funny thing is first off, I will say on the record with my voice here on this podcast, I do not think the NBA rigs the lottery. It's fun to speculate on the tinfoil hat theories and oh my God, Adam Silver's going to, send Wemby to this team because of this reason, but at the end of the day, they definitely don't rig it. They use a third party agency who handles all the draft logistics. Yeah.
And they use a 4-digit combination. It's very different. I think a lot of people, back in the day, it's entirely possible, like the frozen envelope.
Oh, I definitely think they rigged it back in the day. That's the thing is I think they used to rig it and they don't anymore.
But now, there's so much supervision. And of course, with franchise values exploding like they are, look, Victor Wembanyama can double or triple, in some cases, your revenue streams overnight. When we talk about not just what he brings to you in terms of wins and losses, but also sponsorships, foreign interest, all the things he provides you off the floor with just his name and his presence. There's so much money at stake here. Yeah, there's a lot of supervision. And unlike when there was a frozen envelope, they're pulling out 4-digit combinations. It would be pretty difficult for you to rig that in terms of making certain teams and their combos more likely to have the winning 4-digit combination than others. This is a much more sophisticated system than when someone was just reaching in and there's, like the Patrick Ewing lottery back in the day, and there's like 13 envelopes. And well, what if one of them is frozen? Then, you grab that one. Yeah, this is a lot more sophisticated now. And so I think it's going to be a legitimate lottery. However, if there's any chance in the world, even 0.1% that they can rig it to keep Wemby out of Dallas, I hope they do.
Oh man, what would be a worse outcome to you? Wemby in Dallas or Wemby in San Antonio?
Wemby in Dallas.
Okay, yeah, I think
because
I think
because I've said this plenty of times. A team like the Rockets, they have an advantage over small markets like San Antonio and Oklahoma City, even if they draft well. And we know Oklahoma City has all that draft capital, and San Antonio, we're talking about the Wemby hypothetical. Even if they get that, there's still going to be a bit of a tax on those markets, an NBA that's going increasingly global and seeing a select few destinations, which Houston can be. Houston is not Miami, it's not LA, but it's solidly a top 10 market. So is Dallas. And if you pair Wemby with Luka in a market that's comparable to you right in your backyard, that's pretty stiff competition. And you could be going after many of the same free agents, because guys that might be predisposed to playing in Houston, guess what? They're going to be predisposed to playing in Dallas in most circumstances as well, based on many of the same reasons. So I think creating a juggernaut in Dallas would be worse. San Antonio, yeah, it would suck. I know the history there. They are a rival. But I do think that even if Houston doesn't have an optimal lottery outcome, the Rockets have the type of market, they have the type of franchise history and off-court opportunities that they can make up for it in other ways in terms of free agent signings, being an attractive trade destination, and so on and so forth. So San Antonio doesn't scare me as much as hypothetically Dallas with Wemby would.
Plus, it'd be, I'm torn on this because it'd be nice if Dallas got bumped and their pick went back and they actually lost their pick. But Dallas getting bumped back is also potentially bad news for the Rockets if somebody else jumps up into the top 4. So I'm kind of torn on the screwing Dallas over versus keeping Houston safe.
And should mention also that the two spots to really watch for, and this is different because the last couple of years the Rockets were the worst team. So all you had to worry about was pick 5. Unless the Rockets came out at pick 5, and thankfully they didn't, they got one of those 4 lottery picks. This year, it's trickier because you don't have the worst record. So what you need to focus on are the teams at 7 and 8. If Charlotte is at 8 or San Antonio is at 7, you will know before the envelope at pick 6 is pulled that it's going to be the Rockets. Simply because let's use San Antonio as an example. If they are pulled at 7, and they are the 3rd worst team, the only way that the 3rd worst team can have the 7 spot, which is 3rd amongst non-lottery winners, is if the 2 teams ahead of San Antonio, Houston and Detroit, also did not win lottery picks. The same is true for Charlotte at 8. If Charlotte is at 8 and they're the 4th worst team, the only way that they could have the 4th worst or 4th best in this case amongst non-lottery picks is if the 3 teams ahead of them also were the 3, in this case Detroit, Houston, and San Antonio, that were at the top of the odds list. So you do not want to see Charlotte at 8 or San Antonio at 7, because if that happens, before the envelope is pulled, Houston is going to be at 6. Those are the spots to watch. If San Antonio does not come out of that 7 card, if Charlotte does not come out of 8, then your options are wide open by the time you get to 6, and that's what you want if you're a Rockets fan.
Yeah, things would be really exciting. So definitely keep your eye on those 2 cards at 8 and 7, Charlotte, Spurs. Those are the ones you do not want to see. It's also worth noting, one more point to make here before we get to, we'll do a spin before we wrap up today's episode and get our official predictions in. We'll lock them in, and then hopefully we'll get a good spin, and we can mail in the result to Adam Silver overnight, and we'll get FedEx overnight shipping on it. It's worth noting, right? There's a handful of teams here, as far as the outcome is concerned, with that number 2 overall pick. I know we're all caught up in the hype around Wemby and the number 1, but there are some potential outcomes where if, say, Detroit Pistons or Charlotte Hornets or the Pacers then actually the Blazers at pick number 2 is also another interesting one, because they've got Dame currently, and whether or not they actually want to continue to still build around Dame or potentially trade that number 2 overall pick should they jump up. There are a lot of really interesting outcomes for that number 2 overall pick that might not necessarily mean Scoot Henderson is guaranteed to go to whoever lands at number 2, right? There might be teams interested in taking Brandon Miller at number 2. So if the Rockets do fall to pick number 3 and you find yourself in the Scoot Henderson camp and you really want him to be a Houston Rocket, there's still possibility that might happen. And there's even a chance if the Rockets are even all the way down at 4 that maybe a team overthinks things and they decide they want to let Scoot Henderson fall and they're more excited by one of the Thompson twins or a Jarris Walker. So just because the Rockets don't land at pick number 2 doesn't mean that Scoot Henderson is off the table.
Yeah, exactly. And there is intrigue when it comes to who gets those top 3 spots, even if it's not the Rockets, not just for trade purposes, but also the NBA landscape. I was saying earlier that, Wemby going to Dallas, in my opinion, would be the worst case scenario. I think you could mitigate it more, even if it's an in-state rival like San Antonio, because the smaller market factor. The same applies, in my opinion, to Oklahoma City or Utah. It would be annoying, yes, but at the same time, I think you could manage it a little bit more than having Wemby and a city just like yours in the same state alongside Luka. But best of all would be to send them to the East. So besides just who you can trade for, also, is it a Western Conference team that you're playing potentially 4 times a year, or is it an Eastern Conference team that you're playing twice? And if we're talking about playoff matchups down the line, that you wouldn't have to play until the NBA Finals, assuming these guys stick where they are. And of course, the team drafting Wemby is going to want to keep them for a really long time. So that's the other part of it too. It's not just about, the trade possibilities are one thing, but also if Wemby is as generational as people say, then yeah, if he's not going to go to the Rockets, let's send him out east. That would be another thing to watch for. Even if the Rockets, have their card pulled at 5 or 6 and there's not much intrigue once they take the commercial break between 5 and the 4 lottery picks, then yeah, there's still some intrigue because, yeah, if you can send them to the east, that's a much better scenario for the Rockets long term.
All right, we're going to get one more quick prayer in here.
Pray for Victor.
Pray for Victor, and we're going to get our official predictions on the record. Ben, I'm going to let you go first. Where do you think the pin falls, or the pick falls, I should say?
I'm going to say 4.
You're going to say 4? Okay, we're being a little bit realistic. It hurts.
Yeah, they're due for a bit of a regression. Again, they have been lucky the last couple of years, but I can't help but think, and perhaps this is the optimist in me, that they are going to get one of those 4 lottery picks.
Okay. All right. So we got pick number 4 locked in from Ben. My heart has been telling me for this entire pre-draft cycle and the pre-lottery cycle, I think it's going to be pick number 2. I think San Antonio is going to win number 1, and I think Rockets are going to win pick number 2. I think that my heart has been telling me this for months. So
see, I spend my whole thing shilling for James Harden, and you are setting up the shill for Scoot Henderson.
There we go. We respect it. We're shilling for our guys. We respect it. It's all about the hustle. All right, I'm going to run a spin. I don't have it set up to run on the screen for the YouTube viewers. I do apologize about that. Some software issues here on the back end that I'm going to get figured out moving forward. But what I am going to do, because we are an audio only audience as well for the podcast side of things, I'm going to run the spin and I'm going to count it down from the 14th spot in the lottery all the way to number 1. And you're going to get my reaction in real time as, wherever the Rockets may ultimately land.
Okay.
So here we go. I'm going to spin it. We're locked in. I'm number 2. Ben's number 4. Here we go. Oh, okay. All right. We got Pelicans 14, Raptors 13, OKC 12, Orlando 11, Dallas is at 10, so no jump there. Utah at 9, Washington at 8, Orlando at 7, Portland at 6, Houston at 5. Oh man, not the final spin before the lottery. This one sucks. San Antonio at 4, Indiana at 3, Charlotte at 2, and Detroit stays put at number 1. They win the Wemby sweepstakes. I'm so sorry, guys. Look,
well, hey,
all I can hope is that my spins have been so bad here at LOR. I'm hoping that it's going to be like anti-karma for the actual lottery.
Since we're doing this not on the screen, I'm going to do one sim myself as well and see if I can undo your sim.
Okay, all right, I'm with it.
I got it up. Let's do it. Just spoiled it. I got the Rockets at 5 as well.
Oh man, we got the double down. Wait. Two negatives make a positive, right? Like the two negatives cancel out. We're gonna figure out whatever way we can rationalize this lottery stuff going into the lottery.
The top 4 on mine. The Wizards jumped up to 4. The Pacers to 3. The Thunder to 2. Oh man. And the Pistons stayed at 1.
Oh man, Pistons don't. I don't want to see Wemby go to Detroit. I don't want to see that happen.
I don't want to see him go to the Thunder either. So.
I know, right? There's there's not many. I want to see him in a Rockets jersey. That'd be great, right? I don't. Is there a way that we can get Wemby and Scoot in a Rockets jersey? Pull off a little Texans, trade on.
I get 2 and 3, or 1 and 2 in this case.
I'd be all for that. All right. On that note, Ben, we locked in our predictions. It's going to be a ton of fun. Of course, we'll have you covered here for all the post-lottery coverage. Whatever superstitions you believe in, make sure that you break out all the good luck going into the draft lottery. Ben, you know the drill. Let everyone know where they can track you down at.
Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter, the Logger Line on Twitter, rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage, and hashtag pray for Victor. You will find me on there as well.
And that's going to do it for another edition of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.
Ready for Victor.